Alright, I'm here with Paul Friedman, birth date August 28th, 1946, Vietnam War veteran, military branch Navy, highest rank Aviation Ordnanceman, Petty Officer 3rd Class. Today is March 21st, 2011. We are in Coral Springs, Florida. My name is Ettore Lanza. I am interviewing Paul, and this is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. So let's get started. Just some background questions. Where were you born?
Rockaway Beach, New York.
And I just said that you're in the Navy. So were any of your parents in the military? Maybe some relatives, friends?
My Uncle Alvin served in the Navy during World War II as a photographer's mate. My dad couldn't serve because he had an accident where 3 of his fingers were cut off. But he did work for Fairchild Aviation, and I think it was Farmingdale in New York, and he basically worked on P-40s and aircraft. He would try to join every rank there was, but because he was missing his trigger finger, he couldn't enlist. I think I did have a cousin that was in the 101st Airborne, but I don't know what happened to him.
So what was your main drive to join the military?
Well, you got to remember, in 1965, I was just getting ready to graduate high school, and the war was really heating up at that time, and I wanted a little control over my, self-preservation. I wanted some control over my destiny. I didn't want to be drafted and ended up having no control over what I would be doing. I didn't think I was college material at that time, and I was looking for a way of, learning a profession. And so I decided, I met one of the guys just came home from Navy boot camp, and he had a book with all the different occupations there were in the Navy. And I was surfing, having a good time, and I was thumbing through the book, and I looked at some of the aviation rankings because that interests me. Aviation, always been an aviation buff. And I was looking at some of the ranks, and I saw one for meteorology, which was called aerographer. And the school was in Lakehurst, New Jersey, so it wasn't too far from home. And it was sort of kindling. I said, well, I'd be sending up balloons all day, as an aerographer. So I decided to enlist in the Navy, and I enlisted in a program where it was called delayed entry, where you sign up, and then 4 months later you go on active duty, and you do your normal 4 years. And the good thing is that they promised me an aviation school, but I didn't have any choice of which aviation school. That would be determined in boot camp according to my test scores. So I ended up going into the Navy July 12, 1966. I went up to boot camp up in Great Lakes, which is just north of Chicago. And there they did the testing, and I was assigned to Aviation Ordnance School, which was my second or third choice. Wasn't too happy, but aerographer obviously didn't have as many billets, or that. Usually on an aircraft carrier, there's usually like 8 or 12 people in the aerographer's office, and usually in aviation ordnance they got 100 or 200 people. So there are obviously more openings in aviation ordnance. But I wasn't too. I found that the school would be in Jacksonville, Florida, for about 6 months. So that's obviously after boot camp, I went home, did my 2 weeks of leave, and then I reported to Jacksonville to start aviation ordnance school.
So I guess my next question would be: you go to boot camp. Like, how is it adjusting from normal life to now you're in the military? Like, they own you, kind of.
The first day of boot camp, after you get all the shots and all that, and you I had in my mind that this wasn't the real Navy boot camp. It was just teaching you, and as long as everything had a reason to do it, you obviously, you did a lot of marching, you did a lot of drills, you had to do firefighting, you had to gas masks, everything that had to do with shipboard life, learning what you would need to do to be in the Navy. There was schoolwork, they had classes, but everything, if you basically did everything, you kept your hygiene, personal hygiene, you kept your locker clean, you kept your bed clean. As long as you followed everything, you really had no problem, The guys that were having problems were the guys that basically just didn't shape up or had a problem adjusting.
Mhm.
Some of them, we didn't see anymore. They were put into a different company to see if they could adjust, and if they couldn't, then obviously there were guys that had health problems. Like one of the guys had asthma, and he had an asthma attack, and basically the Navy had to reevaluate, see if he could still serve, even though he really wanted to. Most of the guys I was with enlisted. They weren't drafted. They chose this.
Yeah, because that's what I was wondering. Because Vietnam, people were drafted. The draft was out there.
Oh yeah, that's why a lot of guys.
And there's a
enlisted.
difference between drafting and enlisting.
Oh, yeah. Enlisting, you get a chance to choose.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I got a chance to choose. I know when I chose the aviation ordnance or the aviation rankings of the Navy, I'm either going to be on a naval air station or an aircraft carrier. And an aircraft carrier never gets within 40 or 60 miles of the, it's dangerous on a flight deck, but it's better than being in a rice paddy being shot at.
Exactly. So.
Or not knowing what's, So, I went basically in the Navy so I could learn a skill. And I figured meteorology would be one of them, or learning electronics or things like that. Something that when I come out, I might be able, also the GI Bill, so I could use it to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
So that was some of the impetus of,
So, all right, just to fast forward a little bit. When did you were on the USS Forrestal? When did you first get shipped out there?
Like I said, when I went to aviation ordnance school, I reported there in September of '66.
September. And any of your friends come with you from boot camp or?
I had really no friends in boot camp. No one I knew before. No one I knew from civilian life. There was like 80 people that came from mostly the East Coast. A lot of New Yorkers, a lot of guys from New Jersey, people from Ohio, Pennsylvania. But what happened basically is when I got out of boot camp, did my 2 weeks leave, reported to aviation ordnance school. I was there till March. And then I received additional training for the Sparrow missile, to test the Sparrow missile, which is an air-to-air missile.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, but I already had my orders to the Forrestal in '67. Before I reported to the Forrestal, I did 6 weeks of this additional school because I think I was going to go to GM, Guided Missile Division, aboard the Forrestal. I actually reported aboard Forrestal, I think May 17th, 1967. And Forrestal, I couldn't come on board because she was on maneuvers off Gitmo, Guantanamo.
Yeah.
She was doing some qualifications, getting ready to go to Vietnam. Because Forrestal was going to be one of the first carriers to go to Vietnam from the East Coast. Most of the carriers that were serving in Vietnam or in the Gulf of Tonkin were West Coast-based carriers. So now the East Coast carriers were starting to share some of the responsibilities.
All right, so we know that the Forrestal is huge. It was one of the fastest battleships for its size.
No. Aircraft carrier.
Aircraft carrier. Sorry. And I mean, it had its multiple runways. It was basically state of the art for aircraft carriers.
Yeah, it was a supercarrier. It was the first of the supercarrier class.
Yeah.
It was commissioned in 1955, so it was 12 years old by the time I reported aboard. It was in the yards in Portsmouth prior to shipping out to get her updated with most of the most sophisticated electronics and gear and to bring her up to comparable to some of the newer carriers that were being commissioned that was still in her class.
So, I mean, this is a behemoth of a ship. I mean, did you almost feel invincible on it? I mean,
oh yeah, you got lost all the time.
Yeah, I could imagine. When just looking at the picture, it's huge.
Yeah, you're in awe of it, and the first thing you always were worried about is, okay, how do I get to my berthing area? How do I get to the mess decks? How do I get to my general quarters station? That was the one thing you always wanted to know how to get to, because it's tough because it's you go into a hangar bay and it's huge, and then you go into these different spaces and the knee knockers, you got to worry about knocking your head and your knees. So but you got used to it. You start to know where everything was. You take the same way going places,
And I guess we all know John McCain was on this boat or on this ship. And you ever meet him? Ever run into him?
No.
Ever load a missile on his plane?
No, no. See, you got to remember, back then he was just Lieutenant Commander McCain.
Yeah, I didn't know, maybe by accident.
No, we wouldn't. In fact, I didn't know that the McCain that was on the ship that was, was the same McCain that was the senator until about 1988.
Really?
When I saw a C-SPAN episode, and Brian Lamb, the interviewer, said, "What do you remember about the Navy?" And he said, "One day on the Forrestal, remember?" And I just went nuts. I started getting this chill, and I said, "Wow, this is the same McCain that was hit, by the Zuni."
So, I mean, just fast forward a little bit more to the day everyone remembers the Forrestal 4, July 29th, 1967. Just, can you describe what happened? The Phantom premature missile into the Skyhawks.
What happened is the Phantom was...
and they're refueling.
No,
they weren't?
No, the Phantom basically, that morning we were going to be launching 2 Alpha strikes against North Vietnam. We had launched the earlier strike around 8:30, and we were getting ready for a second Alpha strike. And on the starboard, the furthest aft on the ship, on the starboard side, was one of our F-4 Phantoms, and it was Squadron VF-11, and it was basically going from external power to internal power. They back up a little tractor and they hook it in, and they sort of start its generators until its internal power kicks in. Well, when that happened, some stray voltage went across the fuselage along the wingtip, and one of our arming devices, it went bypass that, it tripped, it went through all these safety circuits, and it ignited one of the Zunis in the Zuni pod. There's like 4 to 6, and they're what we call air-to-ground missiles. And the Zuni rocket ignited. It hit one of our crewmen in the shoulder, and then it went across and it hit McCain's Skyhawk. Under the center belly, there's a fuel tank, a 400-gallon fuel tank. It punctured the fuel tank, but it didn't explode. The Zuni rocket has like an arming feature where it has to travel a certain distance, so it went harmlessly into the ocean. But unfortunately, the damage was done because it punctured the fuel tank, and the fuel spilled onto the flight deck. The solid fuel propellant from the rocket ignited the fuel, and it's JP4 fuel, which is very flammable, and it just started a fire. Now, fires are pretty normal on forest, they used to be put out pretty quickly. But unfortunately, 2 of them bombs, which we now know were from World War II, we've been sitting in the Philippines since, who knows, World War II, 1935 or 1944, whatever. But anyway, they were not insulated as much as in some of the modern day bombs. So this bomb ended up cooking off because we're sitting in the flames, and it cooked off in 88 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the firefighters thought they could knock the fire down, and they were around putting fire on and rescuing people. But that bomb cooked off, and it killed a lot of our trained firefighters, and it punctured the flight deck. And once that went off, other bombs started going off, and that was what started the fire.
The chain reaction.
Yeah.
So where were you during all this time? Because you had mentioned to me before this, you worked the night crew, and so you were under it all, basically.
Basically, I wasn't directly under the flight deck where most of our casualties were. What I did is, if you know what an aircraft carrier looks like, it has its flight deck on the top. We call that the roof, and then we have what we call the hangar bay, which is like 30, 40 feet. Then what we have is the main deck, which is the second deck, which is one deck below the hangar deck. I was sleeping on the second deck, but I was all the way back aft in the fantail area of the ship. What happened is one of the 1,000-pound bombs, when it went off, it went through 5 decks, shattered the bulkhead I was next to, and I think after the 3rd or 4th explosion, the big one, the one that shattered the bulkhead, is when I was waking up. And in the book I described that there was a guy standing over me, and he asked me if I was okay. I noticed I had a shrapnel wound in the sole of my foot. Another bomb went off, and we decided to get the hell out of there, and we went to the port side of the ship, and there were other explosions and guys being carried past me. I was limping, I was hopping because I couldn't put pressure on my leg.
Mhm.
So when a couple of guys, like I say in the book, I'm from New York, and the guy from Alabama, he called me New York, I called him Alabama. He grabbed me like a twig, and he helped me to sick bay. And that's basically, when I was in sick bay, I just saw so many other people more severely injured than I was.
Did you see anybody else injured, like as you're walking, like
Yeah,
live action?
Yeah.
I mean, what was that like? I mean, that's got to be.
Well, I didn't know what was
devastating.
going on. I heard,
Yeah. What was your emotion like? Because you come out of a dead sleep with a wound
we were
in your
being
foot.
attacked by the MiGs, because what I thought were we had what we call 5-inch guns on each side of the ship, and I thought they were firing. I didn't know that those were bomb explosions. I had no idea what was going on. So when I got to sick bay, and I saw guys being in the port passageway, there was a guy carried back with a head wound. Guys were helping him. But when I got to sick bay, it was just carnage. It was just guys with third-degree burns. Couldn't tell if they were black or white. There was a guy next to me I knew from boot camp. No, I knew him from aviation ordnance school. His name was Howard, and he had a compound fracture.
Jeez.
And he was sitting next to me, and I was trying to talk to him, and he was out of it. And the corpsman comes to me, and he asked me if I want morphine, and I said, I wasn't feeling any pain at this point, so I just gave it to, I said, why don't you give it to Howard? And he didn't want to treat Howard for some reason. He didn't want to give him morphine. Then they brought in a guy that was in khakis, so he was either an officer or a chief. And he was wet, but he didn't look, he had a mark on him, and the corpsman came up to him and said, there's nothing I can do for him. He didn't look dead. The guys just moved him somewhere else, but they were going into what I call a triage mode. They were basically triaging everything. People that, whatever they did, they couldn't save them. Then the people that they could save, they worked on first. And that's triage. That's, how it works.
Mm-hmm. So 9 bombs go off, correct?
That's,
Around
I wasn't
9.
really counting.
Yeah, I mean,
I just heard them going off and hoping that the guys would stop them from going off, because there's nowhere to go in a ship.
Yeah, exactly, because you're in the middle of the ocean.
There's no fire department. There's, you got to put out that fire.
Yeah. So how long did it take you guys to get the situation under control?
The flight deck fires were out in an hour.
In an hour?
The fires that were below deck burned for another 30 hours. They were still smoldering when we got to the Philippines. Because at this point, other ships were coming to our aid.
Mm-hmm.
We were one of 3 carriers online. The Bonham Rashid, Bonham Rashad, and the Oriskany were also conducting operations. So they stopped what they were doing, brought over firefighting equipment, brought over medical, and basically that's what I was. I was medevac to the Oriskany. Then I was medevac to the hospital ship Repose, who had left Da Nang to help us.
So the Forrestal takes all this damage, and it's still afloat. When do they get it back to the U.S.? When do they sail back?
The Forrestal basically, I think, was on Yankee Station for another day, and then she started steaming 600 miles to the Philippines, Subic Bay. That's where they did some temporary repairs. She then left Subic, came back to Yankee Station to lay a wreath where the fire was.
Mm-hmm.
As a ceremony. Then she went back through Indonesia, under Africa, and back to the east coast of the United States. I think she returned about September 14th to Norfolk. And she was in the yards until the spring of '68. Then she went to the Mediterranean, and she was back in service in '68.
Wow.
So it took 8 months to repair her.
Wow. And just back to you, you have the shrapnel on your foot. You have a wound, and I mean...
It was taken out. I don't think I have any more left.
Yeah, well...
the Oriskany took some out, and then I think the Repose operated on me again, and then I think they cleaned it out.
So, but this is in 1967, so there's no internet, there's no, cell phone. So how did your family find out that you're injured? Because, the Red Cross, did they send...
Well, what happened was...
Because I'm sure they see this on...
A lot of guys, but the guys that I was injured, when I was on the Repose, what happened is the Navy, they were using ham operators to patch us through to the United States. So if it wasn't for the ham operators, And I think the telephone company, they had worked out a link so I can get on the phone with my mother. My mother didn't know if it was alive or dead for 2 or 3 days.
That's what I was going to say, because
Yeah.
information travels a lot slower,
Yeah,
and
well,
I'm sure
they got a telegram.
Yeah, they just see Forrestal bombs
Yeah,
go off.
The guys
and-
also were making calls from Subic when they got back, but I made a call. The hospital ship had a way of connecting us, and that was through the ham operators. We were able to do the connection. So I guess the ham operator did the connection from Vietnam to the San Francisco, and then in fact we've been in touch with a telephone operator who contacted us, said that she was in San Francisco and she played a key role in patching the calls that were coming from Vietnam to different towns in the United States.
So, what day did you get home? Do you think?
Oh, you mean to St. Albans?
Yeah, you got all the way back home, safe and
Okay,
sound.
that was very strange because
Yeah, how did that happen?
I was on the repose for about a week, and then they were telling us were they getting ready to fly us home. But first they would have to take us to the 95th evac hospital in Da Nang. So they're moving us from the hospital ship, and they took us through Da Nang, and I'm seeing these people in black PJs, and I'm saying, I wonder which ones are the enemy at night, you know? And we get to the 95th evac, and there's a date with a hole in the wall. And I said, what's that? He said, well, we were hit by rockets 3 weeks ago. And I was there a day, and I was talking to this Marine, and he said he was hit even while he was being evacuated there. And the next day I was put on a C-130. This is August 5th. I think August 4th, I think I was put on a C-130, which flew us to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. And then August 5th, I left. The next day, I left Clark Air Force Base on a C-141 fourth Starlifter. Took us to Japan. Then from Japan, we went to Anchorage, Alaska. Then from Anchorage, Alaska, Scott Air Force Base in Illinois, outside of St. Louis. Then to Andrews Air Force Base in Washington. And that night, then I landed at St. Albans Naval Hospital in Queens, August 5th, the night of August 5th. Because we crossed the international date line, I was in the air 24 hours, but I left the morning of the same day and we arrived that night. You would think it was 12 hours?
Yeah.
But I actually crossed the international date lines, so I arrived the same night that I left. So, talk about jet lag?
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Yeah, but it was funny. They told us that summer '67, which is a volatile summer with the race riots, H. Rap Brown was protesting, in the Marines. So we went from one war zone to another war zone. So that was pretty much it. I was in St. Albans recuperating till November when I was honorably discharged because of my wound.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next question. Since you were wounded, did you want to be like a career military man?
At that time, I said to myself, you only get one chance to kill me. And the thing is that when I was recovering from my wound, my wrist started hurting me from using crutches in the wheelchair. Because I was probably going to be returned to light duty. I don't know if the Navy would have kept me because of the wound, but also they found out that I had a non-union on my navicular bone. And the funny thing is, I broke my wrist skateboarding. I was going down a hill. I had a slalom, we set up a slalom course, and I hit a rock, and I landed here, and it never healed properly. And the Navy x-rayed me, said, well, we could fix that. We could put a bone through that. You'd be in a cast for 9 months. And I said, okay. And I scheduled the surgery, and my mother had me talk to a private physician, orthopedist. And he said, Paul, are you going to be a truck driver or a ditch digger the rest of your life? I said, no. And he said, don't have the operation. These chances. And I went back to the Navy, and I decided not to have the surgery. And they said, well, we can't keep you in the Navy. And I was ready to go, yes. Because I pretty much had it at that point. I wasn't thinking career military at this point. Later on in life, I wonder if that was because of the pension. But who knows where they would have sent me if, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to take an honorable discharge and collect my disability, and that's pretty much what was my deciding factor is because of the surgery that they wanted to do.
Yeah. So when you got back and you were all and your foot healed, how was it like adjusting back to real life and or civilian life? Because I mean, you saw 9 bombs explode. You saw other shipmates, dying, wounded. Is it just like engraved in your head?
I have a form. A lot of the guys have PTSD because they were up and had to react to what they were seeing, had to make a decision to run towards the fire or away from the fire. I didn't have to make that decision. I was wounded right away. I didn't even know what was going on. I sort of received a $1 million wound. I was very lucky that I survived because I was sleeping on the other side of the bed. It would have went through my head.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel that I pretty much, I don't have any of the major disabilities that some of the PTS guys that I served with that were on the flight deck basically are going to the VA, have a hard time sleeping. They have survivor's guilt because they changed places with someone that died that day, or they couldn't do anything to save someone. But I ended up working for some large corporations. I feel that I do have certain things that might set me off, like if a fire alarm goes off at night, you smoke the in the house, I can't get back to sleep. Anger, sometimes a little road rage, but I can control that. But it's nothing compared to some of the cases of PTSD that there are, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. And just to conclude, I know you're still heavily involved in Forrestal.
Yeah, there's a special bond that exists with the guys
Yeah.
that survived that day. We went through something that no other ship has gone through since World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And, McCain still keeps in touch with us. He came to our 25th anniversary.
Yeah.
We still have a communication with him.
I know you have your book.
Yes, Sailors Till the End. When that came out, see, the Forrestal crew was maligned for a long time because there was a Navy training film that blamed us because we mixed foam with water, but they didn't have bombs going off and things happening. So when the Discovery Channel aired Situation Critical, which really showed what really happened that day, and then in 2002, Greg Friedman wrote this great book called Sailors to the End, where he interviewed us, and I still know why he interviewed me, but my story is told, and it's supposed to be made into a movie, but Hollywood time,
Oh, definitely.
and you want to make sure it's done right, because
Yeah.
Hollywood has the time, can screw things up, like the Towering Inferno, and this is too close to us, so we want to make sure it's done right, and our story is told properly, and with dignity, and that's pretty much,
Well, I mean, that's about it. I can't thank you enough for not only doing this interview, but your courage.
Thank you.
I mean, joining the Navy, that's no joke. You survived it's not. It can be counted as a footnote in history or a blip, but it was pretty serious.
But I also got to tell you, some of the kids, I call them kids, I still remember the Forrestal Association. One of the good things is I get to go on board active duty aircraft carriers and meet some of the men and women who serve today, and they're great. I mean, if you ever get a chance to go aboard a carrier or any naval ship, do it. You're going to meet some of the finest people. And that's all I got to say.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Paul Friedman.